If you actually knew where the bourbon in your glass came from, you probably wouldn't have paid for it. 90% of the world's most famous bourbons aren't selling whiskey, they're selling a narrative. There are $70 bottles out there that cost less to produce than a $25 staple, and you're being conditioned to ignore that. After this video, you will never look at a bourbon label the same way again. Let's begin. 11. Redemption. Whiskey. The truth behind the label. Redemption is not a distillery. It is not a craft distillery, nor is it a passionate young whiskey maker. Redemption is a brand, pure and simple. No stills, no fermentation, no control over the aging process. They don't decide when the whiskey is mature, and they don't manage the barrels. They lack a rickhouse, a philosophy, or a soul. All they possess is a trademark, a bottle design, and a marketing department. Every drop of redemption comes from MGP, Indiana, a massive industrial whiskey factory supplying hundreds of different labels. MGP isn't the villain here. They produce decent spirits. But MGP is not Redemption. Redemption simply buys the exact same whiskey as dozens of other brands, bottles it, and marks up the price by spinning tales of urban, high rye, and modern bourbon. Redemption's high rye bourbon sounds like a proprietary recipe, but it is actually MGP's standard mash bill, available to anyone with a checkbook. There is no innovation, no experimentation, no human touch, just a procurement contract. The issue isn't that they source their whiskey. The issue is the illusion of production. For years, Redemption danced around the truth. They weren't transparent on their labels or in their PR. Only when cornered did they admit the reality. Yes, it's sourced. You are paying $40, $50 for a bottle that you could find cheaper under a different name, same source, same profile, same age, just a different sticker. Redemption thrives on the consumer knowledge gap. They aren't selling bourbon. They are selling confusion. When you buy Redemption, you aren't paying for craftsmanship. You are paying a middleman markup. If a brand doesn't make the liquid, doesn't control the liquid, and won't be honest about what they do, it isn't craft. It's a branding operation. 10. Basil Hayden's, a masterclass in marketing over substance. Basil Hayden's is the perfect example of a whiskey engineered in an accounting office, not a barrel room. It has the aesthetic, a beautiful bottle, a paper bib, and a premium spot on the shelf. It's the perfect gift. But the liquid inside is one of the most watered-down bourbons on the market. 80 proof, the legal minimum. They couldn't go any lower if they tried. Here is the truth few consumers realize. Basil Hayden's shares the exact same mash bill, the same distillery, and the same source as Old Granddad. The only real difference? Water. Basil Hayden's is diluted to the bare minimum, while Old Granddad retains its spicy, bold, and vibrant character. Old Granddad sits at around $15. Basil Hayden's commands $45. You aren't paying for the spirit, you're paying for the packaging and the tap water. Diluting whiskey doesn't just lower the alcohol content, it destroys the structure. It mutes the spice, flattens the body, and turns a bourbon with personality into an amber-colored liquid with a faint hint of wood. The term small batch on the label has no legal weight. There is no definition, no limit, and no regulation. It's nothing more than marketing fluff designed to evoke a sense of craftsmanship. Basil Hayden's exploits this, selling a mass-produced industrial product under the guise of an artisan spirit. Basil Hayden's is designed for people who don't actually drink bourbon. It's for gift buyers. It's for those who believe that a high price tag and a pretty bottle equate to quality. But anyone who knows whiskey sees the truth the moment it hits their palate. This isn't the worst bourbon ever made, but it is one of the most deceptive. It deliberately strips away everything interesting about the spirit, only to sell the remains at a massive premium. 9. Hudson Baby Bourbon, the high cost of cutting corners. Hudson Baby Bourbon is a prime example of a common craft fallacy, trying to outrun time with marketing. They promote small barrels as an innovation. In reality, it's a cost-saving shortcut. Small barrels force whiskey to age rapidly in terms of color and wood extraction, but they fail to provide the time necessary for harsh, volatile compounds to evaporate and oxidize. Whiskey requires patience. There are no shortcuts in chemistry. Hudson often commands a price tag of $60 or more, yet the moment you pop the cork, you're hit with the scent of acetone and nail polish remover. These are the unmistakable hallmarks of immature, underaged spirit. The oak arrives quickly, but it's disjointed, like chewing on a toothpick. It isn't integrated. It isn't round. The ethanol burn is aggressive and lingers unpleasantly. The finish is dry, bitter, and astringent, leaving the palate exhausted. Even after William Grant & Sons acquired the brand, the liquid didn't improve. The marketing machine still screams craft. But the bottle contains 1 to 2 year old whiskey that was pushed to market far too soon. Hudson doesn't deceive you with sourcing. They deceive you with time. They are selling an unfinished product at the price of a mature, well-aged whiskey. 8. Jefferson's Ocean. You're buying a boat ticket, not a bourbon. Jefferson's Ocean doesn't sell bourbon. It sells a voyage. It sells a narrative meticulously crafted to make drinkers believe they are buying something unrepeatable, unfakeable, and impossible to replicate in a standard rickhouse. In reality, the only thing impossible to replicate is the shipping cost. The liquid inside begins its life exactly like any other Jefferson's expression. Sourced whiskey, mostly from MGP Indiana, or similar industrial giants. There is no dedicated ocean distillery, no proprietary mash bill, no unique fermentation, no signature aging philosophy. It starts as an ordinary sourced bourbon. Then, they put it on a boat. The marketing waxes lyrical about sea swells keeping the whiskey in constant motion. The fluctuating temperatures, the salt air, the atmospheric pressure, the sense of adventure. But when you peel back the layers, none of these factors are powerful enough to trigger any significant chemical transformation. Kentucky rickhouses have been doing this for centuries. Scorching summers, freezing winters. Barrels expand, barrels contract. Whiskey breathes into the wood and back out again. High humidity, shifting air. If motion were the secret, rotating barrels in a warehouse would suffice. If temperature were the key, Kentucky's climate already provides more than enough variance. Blind tastings consistently yield the same result. Jefferson's Ocean is indistinguishable from standard Jefferson's. No brine, no salt, no new aromatic layers, no hidden depth. It's the same MGP-style profile: caramel, vanilla, and sweet oak. The color is a match. The nose is a match. The palate is a match. So where is the difference? It's on the balance sheet. Those barrels require chartered ships, insurance, logistics fees, professional photography, cinematic videography, copywriting, storytelling. All of these costs are tacked directly onto the bottle price, jumping from $40 to $80 or $100. You aren't paying for better whiskey, you're paying for frequent flyer miles. Jefferson's Ocean is the textbook definition of experiential marketing. You aren't buying flavor, you're buying the feeling of consuming an experience. But that experience evaporates the moment you close your eyes and focus solely on the liquid in your glass. There is no way for your tongue to taste a sea voyage. There are no receptors on your palate to detect marketing. Bourbon doesn't know where it's been. It only knows how long it spent inside the wood. Jefferson's Ocean isn't a scam in the legal sense. They really do put the barrels on ships. But it is a deception of value. They lead consumers to believe that a performative act creates quality, when in fact, it only creates a story. You aren't drinking the ocean. You're drinking sourced whiskey plus a boat ticket. 7. Templeton Rye. When the truth is treated as optional. Templeton Rye is one of the very few brands in the American whiskey industry to be officially exposed by the law. Not by bloggers, not by reviewers, not by forums, by the courts. For years, Templeton spun a cinematic tale. A small town in Iowa, a population of a few hundred, a secret Prohibition-era rye recipe, and bootleggers brewing the good stuff for a devoted Al Capone. A heritage that survived the dry years, a perfect slice of Americana. The only problem? None of it was true. There was no historical evidence, no documentation, no records, no logical link. There was only a script written to sell whiskey that didn't even come from Iowa. During that period, 100% of Templeton Rye was sourced from MGP, Indiana, a massive industrial plant churning out rye whiskey using a standard mash bill. Templeton didn't distill it. They didn't age it. They didn't control the barrels or the maturity. They simply bought it, bottled it, and sold the myth. When a class action lawsuit hit in 2015, internal documents revealed that the marketing was designed to create a deliberate false impression. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. Templeton settled for $2.5 million. No admission of guilt, no apology, no refunds for the vast majority of consumers. They simply tweaked the wording on the label. From "Made in Iowa" to "Bottled in Iowa." The liquid inside remained exactly the same. This is what makes Templeton particularly insidious. They proved that being sued doesn't mean changing your philosophy. It just means changing your phrasing. Post-lawsuit, Templeton began distilling small amounts in Iowa to get a foot in the door for a new narrative. But their age-stated bottles and core expressions still cannot come from Iowa because time simply doesn't allow for it. They are still MGP. Templeton isn't loathed for using MGP. They are loathed for building an entire identity on geographic fraud and then continuing to cash in after being unmasked. When you buy Templeton, you aren't just buying rye whiskey. You are buying a dangerous precedent that if you lie long enough, beautifully enough, and confidently enough, all you have to do when caught is change the font. In an industry where trust is everything, Templeton doesn't just sell spirits. They sell the message that the truth is optional. 6. Angel's Envy. A ghost in the corporate machine. Angel's Envy is the textbook definition of a brand that has died spiritually while continuing to sell its legacy. When Lincoln Henderson was alive, this was a genuine passion project. As the creator of Woodford Reserve, he was a master distiller whose reputation required no embellishment. Originally, Angel's Envy embodied that spirit, a final, late-life experiment, an exclamation point rather than a mere production line. But Lincoln Henderson passed away in 2013. 2 years later, the brand was swallowed by Bacardi. From that moment on, every critical decision shifted from the hands of a whiskey maker to the desks of a global corporation driven by KPIs, volume, and profit margins. The marketing, however, remains frozen in time. Lincoln Henderson's image is still front and center. The legacy narrative is repeated ad nauseum. Drinkers are led to believe they are tasting a personal vision, when in reality, they are consuming the output of a corporate pipeline. Port barrel finishing was once a stroke of creative genius. But in the context of mass production, finishing has become a cloak. It allows the brand to use younger, less complex whiskey, using the sweetness and color of the port pipe to create an illusion of maturity. Angel's Envy isn't a bad bourbon. It is simply a bourbon that is no longer honest about its own story. You aren't drinking a master distiller's final masterpiece. You are drinking a product optimized for market expansion, retaining the old image while operating under a cold, new logic. 5. Uncle Nearest. History as a marketing shield. Uncle Nearest is a sensitive case because the history behind it is both real and deserving of honor. Nathan Nearest Green is a titan of American whiskey history, an enslaved black man who taught Jack Daniel the craft of distillation. It is a truth that was ignored for far too long. The issue isn't the history. The issue is the product tethered to it. Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey is not a technical continuation of that legacy. The liquid in the bottle was not made by Nearest Green, nor follows his recipe, nor comes from the site where he worked. It is modern-sourced whiskey from undisclosed Tennessee distilleries. For years, the brand resisted transparency regarding its source. They leaned heavily into the narrative, the emotion, and the call for historical justice. Consumers are led to feel that buying a bottle is a moral act. But morality is no substitute for transparency. At $50–$70, Uncle Nearest sits in a price bracket where drinkers have a right to demand data on age, source, and process. Instead, they are given a story. Blind tastings by independent reviewers consistently show a mediocre spirit, one that cannot justify its premium price tag once stripped of its narrative. Uncle Nearest doesn't forge history, but they exploit it as a protective marketing layer to discourage questioning. In the world of spirits, any brand that makes you feel guilty for asking, "Where does this actually come from?" is a brand with a problem. 4. Bulleit Bourbon. The fractured frontier. Bulleit has masterfully built an image of frontier whiskey. The rugged bottle, the vintage font, the 19th century family saga, it's designed to make you feel like you're part of the American pioneering spirit. In 2017, that carefully curated image shattered. Hollis Bulleit, the founder's daughter and the literal face of the brand, filed a claim alleging she was cast out because of her sexual orientation. She was the one who humanized the Bulleit family for the public. When she came out, her role vanished. Diageo, the conglomerate owner, settled out of court, admitted no wrongdoing, and the Frontier family marketing continued as if nothing had happened. Product-wise, Bulleit was for years a ghost distillery. 100% of the bourbon came from MGP, Indiana. Tom Bulleit didn't cook the mash. He bought it, bottled it, and told a story. Even as Diageo eventually built a dedicated distillery, the aged liquid on the shelves today still largely reflects that sourced commodity origin. Bulleit is a study in the disconnect between image and reality. Family is used as a symbol, while the actual family is fractured. Frontier values are preached while internal discrimination is alleged. Craft is the vibe. Sourced is the reality. When a brand uses family values to sell a bottle while that very family is excluded, the problem is no longer what's inside the glass. 3. Jefferson's Reserve, the illusion of selectivity. Jefferson's Reserve thrives on a massive loophole in American bourbon law: the fact that titles carry no obligation to the truth. Reserve sounds curated. Small batch sounds limited. Very small batch sounds exceedingly rare. But the law does not require any of these claims to be true. Jefferson's exploits this to the fullest. Reserve has no legal definition. It requires no extra age, no superior barrels, and no distinct process. An ordinary run-of-the-mill bourbon can be labeled Reserve simply because a brand says so. Jefferson's understands this, and they've built an entire premium segment based on an illusion of selectivity. The common thread in Jefferson's Reserve is the NAS, no age statement. In the bourbon world, NAS is almost always shorthand for one thing. There is young whiskey that needs to be hidden. When whiskey is old enough and good enough, No one hides the age. When it's young, the label goes silent. The price fluctuates between $50 and over $100 based on implications they never actually confirm. When questioned about age or origin, Jefferson's responds with marketing jargon, not data. It is whiskey that refuses to let you know what you're drinking. In an industry where transparency is the moral compass, Jefferson's Reserve chooses the opposite path, keeping the drinker in the dark as long as they keep paying. 2. Whistlepig, a masterclass in geographic deception. Whistlepig is one of the most flagrant case studies of geographic deception in modern whiskey. Vermont on the label. Vermont in the imagery. Vermont in the storytelling. But for years, Vermont was non-existent in the production. Every drop of original Whistlepig whiskey came from Canada, not the US, and certainly not Vermont. It was industrial-scale Canadian rye, decent quality, but bought in bulk, shipped across the border, and rebranded with a new soul. Whistlepig didn't lie outright. They used suggestive language, farm to bottle, Vermont-based, craft rye. They provided the crumbs and let the consumer reach the wrong conclusion. It's the most effective form of deception, letting the customer lie to themselves. When a 2015 class action lawsuit and media pressure forced their hand, they didn't apologize. They just tweaked the font. From Made in Vermont to Bottled in Vermont. The premium price, ranging from $80 to $300, is built on the image of Vermont craft, not the reality of Vermont labor. They don't sell bad rye, but they sell rye with a hijacked identity. 1. Jefferson's Very Small Batch. Strategic ambiguity. Jefferson's Very Small Batch is the final piece of the puzzle, revealing the brand's core philosophy. Ambiguity is a strategy, not an accident. Very small batch means absolutely nothing. It could be 10 barrels, it could be 1,000. Jefferson's won't say, and they don't have to. No age statement, no disclosed source, no mash bill, no specific distillery. Yet, the label is designed to make the drinker hallucinate a rare, hand-selected product. This is the danger of whiskey terminology. When you stack enough prestige-flavored words together, the consumer's imagination fills in the gaps with faith. The profile is typically approachable and round, but that smoothness doesn't come from excellence. It comes from blending for the lowest common denominator. It is young whiskey smoothed over with a splash of older stock. No edge, no risk, no soul. At $40, $50, the price isn't the primary crime. The real cost is the erosion of trust. This bottle teaches you nothing about bourbon. It doesn't teach you about age, wood, or grain. It only teaches you that marketing is a perfectly functional substitute for information. And that is exactly why it belongs on this list. After these 11 bottles, an unavoidable truth remains. You have been taught to drink bourbon the wrong way. Not because you lack knowledge, but because an entire industry is engineered to ensure you don't need it. The next 2 bottles aren't sexy. They aren't limited. They aren't innovative. They don't need your faith. They only need your palate. 1. Wild Turkey 101, the backbone of bourbon. Wild Turkey 101 isn't the bottle that makes you say, wow, at first glance. The bottle isn't fancy. The label isn't luxurious. There is no limited edition tag, and no master distiller's signature laser-etched onto the cap. And that is exactly the point. Wild Turkey 101 operates on a logic diametrically opposed to most of the modern bourbon industry. It doesn't feel the need to convince you that it's special. It simply exists, consistent, honest, and enduring until you are wise enough to realize its worth on your own. This is 100% estate distilled. No sourcing, no outsourced liquid, no Indiana, no Canada. Everything is produced at a single distillery, under a single philosophy, across generations. The Russell family has been the soul of Wild Turkey for over 60 years. Jimmy Russell isn't a marketing face. He's the man who tasted every barrel. His son, Eddie Russell, maintains that same standard, refusing to tweak the recipe to fit the market. 1.1 Proof isn't a random number, it's a deliberate choice. Wild Turkey understands that dilution for profit is the easiest path, but also the fastest way to kill a bourbon's character. 101 Proof preserves the structure, the spice, and the backbone of the wood. It isn't smoothed over for beginners, nor lowered to move more units. What few brands dare to admit is that Wild Turkey often ages their spirit longer than they are required to say. Most of the whiskey in a 101 bottle is 6 to 8 years old, far exceeding the 4-year minimum, yet they don't plaster an age statement on the label to show off. They don't have to. The flavor isn't trying to be subtle, it is bold, direct, and powerful. Deep caramel, vanilla, sharp rye spice, oak that is present but never dry. The finish is long, warm, and free of artificial bitterness. This is bourbon with a skeleton, not a spirit sanded down to avoid offending anyone. At $25–30, it makes many other brands look indefensible. Wild Turkey 101 proves a painful truth to the industry. Quality doesn't require a premium price. If you make it yourself, age it properly, and don't set fire to your money on fake marketing, you don't need to charge $70 to survive. It is the bourbon that beginners learn from, connoisseurs return to, and industry insiders never disrespect. It isn't the greatest bourbon ever made. It is simply the most honest one in its price bracket. 2. Four Roses. Single Barrel, a masterclass in transparency. If Wild Turkey 101 represents tradition and discipline, Four Roses Single Barrel represents transparency and education. Four Roses is one of the few major American distilleries that can look you in the eye and say, "We make everything ourselves, and we are going to tell you exactly what you're drinking." They utilize 5 proprietary yeast strains and 2 mash bills to create 10 distinct bourbon recipes. This is incredibly complex, but instead of hiding behind trade secrets, Four Roses prints the specific recipe code directly on the label. Single barrel means one thing. Every bottle comes from one unique cask. No blending to hide flaws. No averaging the flavor to please the masses. You are drinking the unfiltered personality of a single barrel with all its virtues and its quirks. On the label, you get data. The barrel number, the warehouse location, the specific recipe, the person who selected it. No reserve, no very small batch, no vague descriptors, just data. Usually bottled at 100 proof, it retains its weight without being overly aggressive. The flavor is balanced yet articulate. Ripe fruits, light florals, delicate spice, and clean oak. The finish is long and silky, but never hollow. The most important part. You learn something every time you drink it. You can compare different recipes. You can feel the influence of the yeast and the impact of the warehouse. This isn't just a bourbon to drink, it's a bourbon to study. At $45 to $60, the price is more than fair for a true single barrel. You are paying for the risk the distillery takes, knowing that not every barrel is identical, and refusing to fix it for you. In an industry where most brands are terrified of the consumer knowing too much, Four Roses does the opposite. They give you the keys to the cellar. This isn't a list for you to agree with me. If this video made you start reading labels a little more closely, if it made you pause and question the narrative before reaching for your wallet, then hit the like button. Not for me, but for honesty in the whiskey industry. And if you're done drinking the marketing fluff and want the raw truth, subscribe to the channel. The next video will be even more uncomfortable.